one of the most important dates of the 20th century. In thinking about the best way to honor and remember this milestone, we want to highlight the 16 men who received the Medal of Honor for their actions on D-Day and the days and weeks following. It's important that we honor them, and I apologize if I get a little choked up. Carlton Barrett. Like so many men of the day, Carlton dropped out of high school to enlist in the Army. He wasn't the biggest guy. He stood 5'4", weighed 125 pounds, but he fought with distinction in both North Africa and Sicily with the 1st Infantry Division. Private Barrett was on Omaha Beach D-Day morning. His landing craft dropped him and several other soldiers into neck-deep waters where they immediately faced a storm of enemy fire while trying to wade ashore. An excellent swimmer, Barrett risked his life several times swimming out to the landing craft and saved panicking soldiers from drowning, by some accounts up to 6 trips. But his heroics didn't end there. Despite being severely wounded, he carried important dispatches across the fire-swept beach, calmed shocked men, and tended to the wounded. Carlton Barrett survived the war, and after returning stateside, he re-enlisted in the Army in 1947 and would go on to serve with distinction for 2 more decades. In 1984, his right leg was amputated as a result of his D-Day injuries. He died several years later. He was small in stature, but huge in heart. Carlton Barrett. John Butts. 2nd Lieutenant John Butts was one of 5 brothers to serve in World War II. He saw action in both North Africa and Sicily and was assigned platoon leader in the 9th Infantry Division. Butts was wounded on June 14th and again on June 16th, but both times he refused medical attention so that he could continue to lead his men. On June 23rd, he led his unit against a German stronghold on a key hill. Ordering his men to attack from the side while he charged directly up the hill on his own to draw fire away from the unit, Butts was hit twice but kept going. He was less than 30 feet from a machine gun nest before he was hit for the last time fatally. Taking advantage of Lieutenant Butts' distraction, his men took the hill. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his selflessness and bravery. One of many examples of soldiers sacrificing their lives in order to help their men have a chance. This type of sacrifice was so commonplace during World War II that we sometimes forget just how brave and selfless it really was. They made it seem routine, but we know that it wasn't. Robert Cole. As many of you know, one of the most pressing needs on D-Day was to unify Utah and Omaha beachheads. Seizing the small French town of Carrington was crucial for this, and on June 8th, the 101st Airborne Division was sent to do this. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cole, commander of the 3rd Battalion of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne, who was tasked with securing Carrington. On the afternoon of June 10th, Cole led 400 men of his battalion single file down a long exposed causeway towards Carrington, which became known as Purple Heart Lane. It was essentially a shooting gallery, and they suffered massive casualties as they inched towards their goal. His unit barely survived the night, and when artillery fire failed to knock out German fire, Cole ordered a go-for-broke bayonet charge, which he personally led. At first, only a handful of men followed him, but soon the entire battalion was bayonet charging, forcing the Germans into a retreat. It became known as Cole's Charge, and though it proved costly, it helped with the capture of Carrington on June 12th, of course with that huge assist from Easy Company of Brand of Brothers fame. Cole would be nominated for the Medal of Honor for his bayonet charge, but sadly he wouldn't live to see it. During Operation Market Garden, Cole was killed by a German sniper while putting down some identification panels for air support, a dangerous job he insisted on doing himself. Robert Cole died the way he lived, by leading his men. Arthur DeFranzo. Art DeFranzo enlisted in the Army in 1940 straight out of high school and served in the 1st Infantry Division, better known as the Big Red One. He saw all sorts of action leading up to D-Day, including the invasion of North Africa, as well as the invasion of Sicily. He was a hardened veteran by D-Day, no doubt about it. The 1st Infantry Division was among the first wave of troops that stormed ashore at Omaha Beach, and as many of you know, they took massive casualties in the first few hours of the assault, but they managed to secure the beachhead by day's end. On June 10th, DeFranzo and his unit were moving through the hedgerows of France when they were ambushed. One of their scouts was wounded and lay dying out in the open when DeFranzo courageously rushed out and returned him to safety. DeFranzo was hit but refused aid and again re-entered the open field to take out 2 German machine gunners. Amazing. He was hit again but kept advancing, taking out more machine gun nests with grenades and clearing the way for his company's advance with a minimum of casualties. He was hit yet again and finally succumbed, but not after saving innumerable lives that day. He had 3 brothers in the war, and all would survive to keep his memory alive. What an extraordinary man, Arthur DeFranzo. Charles DeGlopper. Charles DeGlopper joined the Army in 1942 upon graduating from high school. Detecting a pattern here, by the way? As part of the 82nd Airborne, he saw extensive action in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy before D-Day. 3 days into the D-Day invasion, DeGlopper landed behind enemy lines with orders to take La Fière Bridge. His platoon was soon cut off from the rest of the battalion and under withering German fire. To give his platoon a chance to escape, PFC DeGlopper jumped into the middle of the road and took a stand with a heavy automatic rifle, deliberately drawing enemy fire on himself. And even after being shot twice, DeGlopper continued to fire on German positions until his platoon escaped to rejoin the rest of the battalion. I mean, that's badass stuff. He willingly and knowingly sacrificed himself in order to make sure that the rest of his platoon survived. Truly unbelievable. Charles DeGlopper was the only soldier from the Glider Infantry Regiment to receive the Medal of Honor, and he was also the only man from the 82nd Airborne to receive it for action during Normandy. Pretty amazing, given how heroically the 82nd Airborne performed. Walter Ehlers. Walter Ehlers followed his big brother Roland into the Army, enlisting in 1940 prior to Pearl Harbor. Underage, he needed his parents' permission, which he got, with the condition from his mother that he be a, quote, good Christian soldier. Both brothers are part of the 1st Infantry Division, again, the Big Red One. We're going to see a lot of that today, and saw intense action in North Africa and Sicily before returning to England to prep for D-Day. They were forced to split up, and sadly, Roland would die in the early morning hours on Omaha Beach, something that Walter wouldn't learn about till weeks later. Walter was more fortunate, surviving the D-Day landings. His unit fought their way off the beach, and by June 9th, they were near the town of Goville, 8 miles inland. On that day, he led his unit's attack against German forces and single-handedly defeated several machine gun bunkers. The next day, his platoon came under heavy fire. Ehlers was wounded, but managed to cover the platoon's withdrawal. This included carrying a wounded man to safety and running back through enemy fire to retrieve his Browning automatic rifle. After treatment of his wounds, Ehlers refused to be evacuated and continued to lead his squad. Ehlers was wounded again fighting at Saint-Lô and later again in the Hürtgen Forest. It was during a train ride to rejoin his outfit that Ehlers learned that he had been awarded the Medal of Honor. After 30 days leave of the United States, Ehlers returned to Europe in time to join the fighting in the Rhine River Valley in March of 45. I mean, truly amazing. He suffered 2 more wounds before finally being discharged in the summer of 45. When he returned home, he told his mom he had kept his promise and that he had fought honorably for God and country. Ehlers lived to be 92 years old. God bless him. Joe Gandara. Joe Gandara was the son of Mexican immigrants and quit high school to enlist in the United States Army. He was a member of the 82nd Airborne and was part of combat operations in coastal France on June 9. On that day, Private Gandara's detachment came under unrelenting German fire, pinning the men to the ground for 4 hours. Private Gandara voluntarily advanced alone towards the enemy position, firing his machine gun from his hip as he moved forward and destroyed 3 hostile machine guns before he was fatally wounded. I could only imagine how that looked, like something out of a movie, the guy shooting from the hip. What a complete and total badass this hero was. Joe Gandara is another hero who selflessly and willingly sacrificed his own life in order to give his men a better chance at making it out. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this. What a hero. Originally awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, it was upgraded to the Medal of Honor in 2014 as part of the Defense Department's review of Medal of Honor awards from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam to root out any ethnic bias. Though it took 6 decades, the Defense Department got it right. Joe's sacrifice for his men and country was in keeping with the greatest tradition of the Medal of Honor. John Bud Hawk. Bud Hawk enlisted in the Army straight out of high school, again another guy, and by 1944 was serving as a sergeant in the 90th Infantry Division in France. By August, the Germans were surrounded in an area known as the Falaise Pocket and were desperately trying to break out. On August 20, Bud Hawk was commanding a machine gun squad with the mission of preventing the Germans from escaping the encirclement. German tanks and infantry were rolling his way, and Hawk's gunners were outnumbered, and they soon lost 2 of their guns. The young sergeant took cover behind a tree but was hit. Even so, he managed to hold off the onslaught practically single-handedly with a bazooka, and during a brief lull in the action was able to fix the other machine guns and reorganize his men for a counterattack. Truly staggering. The German attack soon resumed. By this point, 2 American tank destroyers had been brought up, but they couldn't see through the tree. Keep in mind, Hawks is still badly injured, but he volunteers to make himself a human aiming stake for the tanks, which meant essentially exposing himself as target practice. It worked, and 2 of the tanks were destroyed and a 3rd retreated. The skirmish proved critical in keeping the Germans trapped in the Falaise Pocket until they surrendered. When he received the Medal of Honor a year later, President Harry Truman made the rare move of traveling to Hawks in Washington State to present it at the state's Capitol steps. "This is not mine," he told the president. "I hold it in trust for those I served with, for those who gave their lives." Amazing. John Kelly, not to be confused with the other John Kelly, the 2-time Medal of Honor recipient from World War I. This John Kelly was serving as a corporal in the 79th Infantry Division near Fort de Roule, France, on June 25th, when his unit was pinned down by enemy machine gun fire from a deeply entrenched, heavily fortified position. So how does Kelly respond to this predicament? Kelly armed himself with a pole charge about 10 feet long with a 15-pound explosive attached to the end of it, maneuvered up a slope under intense machine gun fire. He placed the charge at the base of a fortified gun position, then retreated to safety. Unfortunately, the resulting blast was ineffective, doing little damage. So what does Kelly do? He volunteers for his 2nd attempt. I mean, talk about guts and determination. He made the treacherous climb a 2nd time, planted another charge, then made his escape. The 2nd blast blew up the machine guns guarding the front entrance, but Kelly wasn't done yet. He goes up a 3rd time, and this time he plants an explosive charge at the strong point's rear entrance. Kelly blows that up, and the survivors come out and surrender. Truly staggering how determined he was to eliminate this German stronghold. Sadly, he was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously as he died 5 months later in battle after being promoted to technical sergeant. A true leader among men. Jimmy Monteith. Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith is yet another hero from the Big Red One, and like the others mentioned, saw intense combat in both North Africa and Sicily before heading to England to prepare for D-Day. Jimmy landed on Omaha Beach as part of the first wave on D-Day, seeing some of the most intense and bloodiest action that morning. It was utter chaos. In fact, his sergeant remembered Jimmy saying, "Men, there's one thing for sure, this ain't our day." Nonetheless, disregarding his own safety, like so many of these heroes did, he organized his men through the chaos and led an assault through the exposed terrain to get to the safety of a cliff. He then led 2 tanks that were stuck under withering fire through a minefield and into firing position, destroying several German pillboxes. He then rejoined his company and under his leadership captured safer high ground. He then set up a defense perimeter to thwart repeated German counterattacks and almost single-handedly keeps them at bay. He repeatedly crisscrossed 300 yards of open terrain to resupply their position until he was fatally killed by a German sniper. What an amazing man. How impressive was Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith that day? Both Dwight Eisenhower and Omar Bradley put him forward for the Medal of Honor, the only time that ever happened. I must say, this looks like a Medal of Honor to me, Ike wrote to his chief of staff. This man was good. Amen, Ike. Jimmy Monteith was good. Carlos Ogden. Carlos Ogden was a 3-sport star in high school when he enlisted and eventually attended officer candidate school. First Lieutenant Ogden and his company were guarding the approaches to Cherbourg, France on June 25th when they were suddenly pinned down by a German 88mm gun and 2 machine guns. Ogden armed himself with a rifle, grenade launcher, and hand grenades and advanced alone up a slope under heavy fire to knock it out. A bullet struck him in the head and knocked him down, but Ogden somehow continued his advance and knocked out the guns with a grenade and again is wounded. The guy sort of reminds me of Matt Urban. The personal bravery is just astonishing. Thankfully, he would go on to survive the war and become an outstanding civic and business leader, including a stint as the head of California's Selective Service Board, appointed by Governor Ronald Reagan. If you're ever at Arlington National Cemetery, look up his headstone. What an amazing individual. Frank Peregory. Technical Sergeant Frank Peregory dropped out of high school when he was 15 to help his father raise his 7 siblings after his mother died. He then lied about his age to join the Virginia National Guard. So you already know what type of stand-up guy he is. Like Jimmy Monteith, Frank was among the first wave to hit Omaha Beach in the early hours and saw the brunt of some of the most difficult and bloodiest action. After 2 days of intense fighting, his unit had fought its way to Grand Camp, where the Germans controlled the high ground above the town. Opening fire on the advancing Americans, they inflicted heavy casualties. American tank and artillery support proved ineffective until Peregory took matters into his own hands. Moving up the hill on his own under intense fire, Peregory spotted a trench leading towards the main positions, jumped in it, and advances until running into a squad of German soldiers. Using a bayonet and hand grenades, Peregory kills 8 and forces the other 3 to surrender. Truly amazing. Moving further along the trench, he forced 32 more German soldiers to surrender. His fearlessness and exploits opened the way for an American advance to secure the town. I mean, just staggering. Sadly, while fighting in the hedgerows 6 days later, Peregory was killed in combat. The road leading to Virginia National Guard Armory in Charlottesville is named appropriately Peregory Lane. John Pinder. John Pinder was a well-regarded right-handed pitcher working his way through the minor league system, surely to be a big leaguer someday, when he put it on hold like so many other professional athletes and enlisted immediately following Pearl Harbor. Like many of the guys we've discussed today, Pinder also fought with the Big Red One in Africa and Sicily and then traveled to England to prepare for D-Day. Technical Sergeant Pinder had obtained the rank of Technician 5th grade and was in charge of his unit's communications equipment, a very important role, especially in those early hours when things were so chaotic. On Omaha Beach, he carried the heavy equipment through the surf but was shot as he weighed ashore. Pinder refused medical treatment and continued on to secure his equipment. He then went back into the surf 3 times to salvage other communications equipment. On his 3rd and last trip, Pinder was shot again, yet still refused medical aid. He continued to set up a communication station, but was shot a 3rd time, unfortunately fatally. He died on D-Day, which also happened to be his birthday. We have a longer video coming out called Baseball Players at War, and I go into much more detail about this amazing man. We're familiar with so many of the major leaguers who fought in the war, guys like Ted Williams and Bob Feller, Yogi Berra, Warren Spahn, the list is endless. But few know about John Pinder, who was the only baseball player to receive the Medal of Honor and would likely have been a pitching star if he lived. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt is surely an interesting case and probably requires a longer video. We could do a whole hour on Teddy and his colorful and busy life. Look, there's no doubt that being President Roosevelt's oldest son had something to do with this. If he wasn't a Roosevelt, I'm not sure he would have received the Medal of Honor. But it's important to keep in mind that he was both the oldest man and the only general to storm the beaches of Normandy among the first wave. It's also important to keep in mind that he served previously in World War I and during World War II, and had gained a reputation for leading from the front during the North African and Sicily campaigns. In fact, Patton himself said Teddy Roosevelt Jr. was one of the bravest men he had ever seen. It's also worth noting that Roosevelt wasn't slated to be part of the D-Day invasion, but he pestered his superiors until he was allowed to lead the 8th Infantry Regiment and the 70th Tank Battalion onto Utah Beach. Roosevelt's unit landed a mile from their target beach, for which he famously said, "Then we'll start the war from right here." And he moved inland to engage the enemy from the rear. He essentially acted as a cheerleader that morning, keeping morale high, encouraging the men, moving them from one location to another, rallying the troops. There's no doubt that, as the only general among the first wave, he contributed to establishing the early beachhead. Recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross, It was upgraded to the Medal of Honor after Roosevelt died of a heart attack in France a month after D-Day. Again, this is an unusual situation, but rather than dwell on the politics of it, I'd rather just remember Teddy for the heroic and selfless leader that he was. He didn't have to seek the most dangerous assignments at age 56, but he did. The guy truly loved his country and was as brave gets. Matt Urban. Matt Urban is one of my favorites. If you're a regular to this channel, you know we've done a bunch of shorts and even a longer video on Matt. Link in the description box below. But definitely check it out. He was truly an amazing man. Urban is actually the second most decorated man of World War II after Audie Murphy, and received an astonishing 7 Purple Hearts during the war, the most of anyone. The Germans actually had a nickname for him, the Ghost, because every time they thought he was dead, he reappeared. His actual Medal of Honor citation may be the longest in history. If you have a chance, Google it and look it up. It's about triple the length of the usual citation, and even that doesn't do it justice. The guy was a one-man wrecking crew. You really have to watch my longer video to get a sense of how special Matt Urban really was. But to quickly summarize it, during the initial landings on D-Day, he broke his leg, yet mounted a tank and led an assault. A week later, he destroyed 2 German Panzer tanks with a bazooka while being severely wounded. He was wounded so badly, in fact, that he was sent back to England to recuperate. But when he learns that his unit is stuck in the hedgerows at Saint-Lô, Matt Urban decides to break out of the hospital, stow away on a troop transport, and then literally hitchhikes his way to Saint-Lô, where he rejoins his unit just in time to single-handedly drive an abandoned tank into a German unit and lead the counteroffensive. For the remainder of the war, he's wounded a bunch more times. At one point, he's re-hospitalized, breaks out again to rejoin his troops, and somehow survives it all. The paperwork on his Medal of Honor got lost for some 4 decades until someone at the Pentagon stumbled upon it in the late 1970s, and he was finally awarded the Medal of Honor. At the ceremony, President Jimmy Carter called him the greatest soldier in American history. Look, that's highly subjective and debatable, but that gives you a sense of the man's accomplishments. Matt is also number 3 on our top 10 World War II badass list after Audie Murphy and John Basilone. Link in the description box to that video. Matt Urban, he's no urban legend. He was the real deal. Bob Vance. Bob Vance was born into a family of aviators. His father was a civilian flight instructor, and his uncle was killed flying in the Army Air Services in World War I. Vance was a member of the West Point class of '39, known as the Warrior class, destined to fight in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. On June 5th, Vance was assigned to lead the 489th Bomb Group against German defenses at Pas-de-Calais. Vance positioned himself on the flight deck of the lead plane, standing right behind the pilot and co-pilot. Unfortunately, the first pass over the target had a failed bomb drop, so they made a second run, and the bomber sustained heavy damage that continued on. Anti-aircraft fire wounded 4 crew members, knocked out 3 of the 4 engines, and one of the bombs failed to release. Shrapnel from another flak blast then killed the pilot, wounded severely the co-pilot, and almost severed off Vance's right foot. The wounded co-pilot somehow managed to bring the bomber into a steep glide to prevent a deadly stall, while Vance, in excruciating pain mind you, assisted in feathering the propellers to shut down the 4th engine in order to glide the crippled bomber. I mean, can you imagine this? Nearing the English coast, Vance knew his B-24 was too damaged to land safely and ordered the crew to bail out. With the injured radio operator still aboard the aircraft, Vance decided to ditch in the English Channel. It was a rough ditching and landing, but miraculously they both managed to survive. Hospitalized for nearly 2 months, Vance was sent back to the States on a C-54 for additional treatment and to be fitted for a prosthetic leg. On June 26th, between Iceland and Newfoundland, the C-54 disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean. Vance's Medal of Honor was confirmed on January 4th, 1945. His widow, Georgette, requested the ceremony be delayed until his daughter was old enough to remember the ceremony and to be presented her father's medal. Truly heartbreaking. And finally, Hulon Whittington. Hulon Whittington enlisted in the Army in 1940 and participated in the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, and was awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, all prior to D-Day. Whittington was with the 41st Armored Infantry on July 29th near Grimsnil when a fierce German attack began around midnight and quickly overran some outposts. Sergeant Whittington reorganized the defenses and, under fire, crawled between gun positions to check the actions of his men. When the Germans attempted to penetrate a roadblock he had organized, Whittington disregarded the machine gun fire, mounted a tank, and by shouting through the turret, directed it into position to fire point blank at the lead German tank. The destruction of this tank blocked all movements of the remaining column, consisting of over 100 panzers, by the way. The blocked tanks were then destroyed and the Germans captured. And if that wasn't enough, when their medic was killed, Sergeant Whittington personally administered first aid to his wounded men. After receiving the Medal of Honor in 1945, Whittington remained in the Army for the next 20 years, even serving a brief tour of duty during Vietnam, where he suffered a heart attack. He died a few years later at age 47 and was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery. God bless these amazing heroes. I hope you enjoyed this video. What a truly extraordinary group of men worthy of the Medal of Honor. Till next time, I'm Nick Ragone.